right, good morning. Welcome, everyone. It's 11:01, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our wonderful event for the day. So we thank you for coming. Today's presentation is by Dr. Paul Hanstedt on transforming general education. So we look forward to hearing lots of exciting things from him. Before we get started, we want to thank Dr. Rye's office and Carolyn Terry for co-sponsoring this event. And we'd also like to thank Samantha Veneruso and Tacey Holliday with MC InnovationWorks for also co-sponsoring our event today. We'd like to thank Vice President and Provost Margaret Latimer for her hospitality here at the Germantown campus today. We'd also like to thank the Media Resources staff here at Germantown, in particular Chris Cusick, for arranging for our audio and video so that we can share what we learned today with the rest of the community. We'd also like to thank Jacob and Chartwells for the fantastic catering that we have out front. So before we get started with Dr. Hanstedt, I'd like to introduce Professor Heather Sotrom, who is an assistant professor of the American English Language Program at our Tacoma Park campus, to introduce him.
Good morning. It's so nice to see you all here, and I'm so glad that there was no snowstorm this morning. What a relief. I'm so pleased to welcome my friend Paul here today. As soon as I heard that general education was going to be looked at, I said to Tammy, I know somebody you need to talk to. Dr. Hanstedt is a professor of English and the director of pedagogical innovation and research at Roanoke College, where he has led the revision of a campus-wide general education program, developed an innovative writing across the curriculum program, coordinated the implementation of the college's e-portfolio system, edited a national literary journal, and taught classes ranging from travel literature to creative fiction. That sounds like a great job. He is the recipient of several teaching awards, including the 2014 Case Virginia Professor of the Year. He has received a Fulbright to aid curricular revision in Hong Kong. His short stories and articles have been published in a variety of venues, including the Chronicle of Higher Education. And he's authored 2 books, Hong Kong, Travel Memoir, and General Education Essentials, which some of you have read, a faculty introduction to current trends in liberal education. He is a regular essayist on Virginia Public Radio. And he also is an avid cook and writes a terrific blog that I really enjoy called, let's see if I can find it here, Food That Doesn't Suck. It's a great name. And it's weekday recipes for parents with an aversion to frozen food. I love reading that one. And one of his short stories also appeared in this terrific book that recently came out, Books That Cook, The Making of a Literary Meal, which is delicious reading. So without further ado, I welcome you to hear Dr. Paul Hanstedt. Thank you.
Thanks for having me here. I love having these conversations. I think there's no better way to indicate what my personality is like than if you look at my Twitter handle, Curricular Geek. When I signed up for Twitter and I went on and found that Curricular Geek was still available, I was shocked. So please, if you have questions, there was going to be a brief Q&A kind of in the middle to make sure that everyone's sort of awake, I guess, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. But if you've got questions or ideas that are going on or things that you hear that particularly strike you, and you are someone who tweets, please feel free to go ahead, because I do check that and pay attention to it. And there's times I've visited campuses and I've had ongoing conversations for months with people as a result of it. So please feel free. I love having these conversations. And thank you all for coming. I want to begin with a quote from Jerry Gaff. He's kind of considered the grandfather of contemporary liberal education in the United States. And it's just to kind of foreground this. You know, I come from a small liberal arts college. I went to Hong Kong and worked with huge universities there. You know, Montgomery College has its own distinct profile. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, you knew that I knew, but also that we all were kind of paying attention. Every institution really has to come up with a curricular model that fits their needs, their faculty's interests, and the students' needs. So just to foreground that, and you point out, yes, this article is 35 years old. Doesn't matter. This is still one of the most timely pieces of writing that you're going to encounter on general education. That aside, I'm going to do something a little different here, okay? We're going to play a game. I'm going to give you a scenario, okay? Some of you might recognize the scenario. If you've been to camp and you know this story, just be quiet. Stay, don't say anything, don't tell your neighbor, don't ruin it for people, okay? But I'm going to give you a scenario, okay? And what you have to do is you have to ask me questions trying to figure out the answer, what the situation is, what's going on in this situation, okay? The questions you can ask me have to be yes or no questions. You're limited, all right? Make sense? So again, if you know this, don't ruin it for your neighbors, okay, people? A man walks into a bar. He walks up to the bar and he says, ask for a glass of water. The bartender looks at him, reaches under the bar, pulls out a gun, points it at him. The man says, thank you, turns around and walks out. What happened? Yes or no questions. What's going on? A man walks into a bar, asks for a glass of water. Bartender pulls out a gun, points it at him. The man says, thank you, turns around and walks out. What's going on? Yes or no questions?
Is it a squirt gun?
No, it's not a squirt gun. That's a good question, though. Yeah.
Was it a,
Yeah.
No.
Please repeat.
Okay. for
Was it a
recording
squirt gun?
purposes. No, it was not a squirt gun. Good question, though. That's the right kind of question.
Do they know each other?
Do they know each other? No, they do not. Good question as well. Do they speak the same language? Excellent question. No. Oh, yes, they do speak the same language. Yes, good. Any others? Okay, yes, please.
Does he have on a prison uniform?
Does he have on a prison uniform? No, he does not. He does not. Okay, let me give you another one, okay? Louise is going home. Suddenly in front of her, she sees another woman. She turns around and goes back where she came from. Why? What's going on? Louise is going home. She sees another person in front of her, another woman, turns around and goes back where she came from. Why? Is it her husband's ex-wife? I like the way you think, but no. So, other questions? Does she know her? I'm going to say, I should be able to say yes or no. I'm going to say kind of. Not no, but not quite yes. Yes?
Did she turn around because of the woman on the street?
Absolutely. Yes?
Is that woman wearing a uniform?
Yes. Is that woman wearing a uniform? Go ahead.
remind her that she had some unfinished business?
Did it remind her she had some unfinished business? No. Yeah, good. Yes? Does she have an arrest record? No, although these days it's possible, but no. When you find out the solution is when you'll understand that joke I just made there. So go ahead. No. No, she's not. Okay, here's another one. A woman walks into a doctor's office. She's a gymnast. Okay, a gymnast coach, gymnastics coach, and she was showing one of her athletes, student athletes, a move, and just suddenly felt this pain in her ribs. And so she tried to take care of it. She tried to do some stretches. Nothing seemed to work, so she went in the doctor's office. The doctor takes a look at her. They have a question. He kind of asks her, probes a little bit, and then they do an X-ray. X-ray comes back negative. He says, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a massive course of ibuprofen. Okay, we're just going to go with the theory that it's a pulled muscle, and we're going to try this, right? And so she takes a massive course of ibuprofen, and it keeps going, and the pain does not go away. And in 2 weeks, she's taken so much ibuprofen that she ends up going to the emergency room with kidney failure. And her rib still hurts. What's going on? Yes or no questions?
Has she had her appendix out?
No.
Does she need to have an appendix?
No. Food poisoning? Nope. Did she sue for malpractice? I hope not, because I got this story from a friend. Yes?
She had a mammogram in the last year.
No. Okay. What do all these have in common? All right. The obvious logics don't fit. Is it a squirt gun? Do they not know each other? Are they wearing a uniform? Okay. They require lateral thinking, indirect approaches, creativity. So for instance, had someone asked about the first scenario, a man walks into a bar, does he have the hiccups? Right. Or they asked about scare the hiccups out of him. Or if they asked, and you were very close to this, for the second scenario, Louisa going home, is the person wearing a uniform? Yes. Is she wearing a mask? Yes. Is it a baseball catcher's mask? Yes. Because they're playing baseball. Somebody said street over there. I never said anything about street. Okay. Okay. So these are situations where the obvious logic simply doesn't work. That's what all three of these scenarios have in common. Here's what they don't have in common. The first two are riddles. They're jokes. Anybody do these at camp when they were kids? Yeah, a couple people? Yeah, I loved these when I was a kid. And I use these with my kids when I'm traveling, keep them busy, keep them out of trouble. The first two are riddles. The third one is real life. Got the scenario from my friend Peter, who's a doctor, which is why I hope he didn't get sued. And it was a real scenario. Woman comes in, the obvious solution isn't clear. He tries the obvious thing, it doesn't work. It turns out that it's not breast cancer, but it's bone cancer. But it didn't show up on the initial x-ray. 3 weeks later, when they do another x-ray, it looks like there are flies all over her ribs. Okay? But I could have given you any number of scenarios like this. I have a friend who's an architect in Charlottesville, Virginia, where they had a scenario where Charlottesville, Virginia is land tight. There's not very much free land. And there was an area of town that has largely minority populations and not a lot of representation in this very affluent town. They had a nice lot. And the people in the town wanted to turn that into a park. The people in the area wanted to turn that into a park. Well, the people in the town, we need this for housing. So a bunch of developers, they wanted to turn it into, put some roads in and put some individual family houses. Well, an architectural firm said, what you need is a big old apartment building. Condos, so you can have more people in there. Well, the people in the town didn't want that. They wanted their park. How do you solve this problem? I could have given you any number of questions from any number of areas. Here's the point I'm going with. As often as not, these kinds of problems that require lateral thinking, creative thinking, are the kinds of problems that our students face in their lives, and we do as well, and in their careers. I know a lot of your students are working at this point, but even beyond that, when they go on, and if they transfer, they get college degrees, they go into their jobs. These are the kinds of problems they're going to be facing. Problems where the solution is not obvious, because sometimes students don't go into the fields that they studied. The statistic we work with on my campus is that only 43% of our students leave college and go into the exact same field, where X of the major fits X of the career. Or sometimes they don't get the jobs they want. Sometimes it's by choice that they don't pursue this career path. They're only 22 or 23 or 24, after all. But sometimes they can't pursue the career path they want. I have a creative writing major. I teach in a creative writing major. Some of my students are working for Geico. That's not exactly what they were thinking they were going to do, okay? Or they don't stay in the fields that they do. We know that in teaching, there's a roughly 50% attrition in the first 3 years. It's also very high for nursing, but it's also not uncommon that in a lot of people's career paths, they spend 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and then they see this other opportunity over there, and they're like, I wonder if, and they pursue it. And of course, sometimes even if they stay at the company that they originally get hired with, or the organization, they won't stay in the same position. They'll move up. So they're going to be facing constant change, constant new challenges, things that are unpredictable, that they don't see coming. And of course, the workplace is also changing too. There's new technologies. Right now, at this very moment, I'm using 4 things that I didn't work or worry with 5 years ago. I've got my own clicker. I've got a laptop. I had to get the toggle to get the laptop going. I had to be mic'd up, and Twitter. These are things that were not in my reality 5 years ago. Who knows what realities we're going to have 5 years from now? There are new markets, new clientele. Nobody saw Myanmar opening up. I know the guy who's the ambassador for there. He didn't see it coming, okay? So new countries, new clienteles, new markets that we never think about, new regulations. I have a friend who works for a startup organization in Minneapolis. Post-Enron, everything changed. What they had to do and how they had to do it, completely different than it had been before. And just generally new challenges, new problems, things that we don't see coming. Here's where I'm going with all of this, is I worked with a guy in Hong Kong named Edmund Ko. He was educated at Stanford University, and then he went and he worked at Carnegie Mellon. And when I met him, he was working at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And he talked about his engineers. And he said, the thing about engineers is they face what we call in the field wicked problems. A wicked problem is a problem where the parameters, what defines the problem, how you can solve the problem, they're shifting constantly. At the very least, year to year, but also day to day sometimes, week to week. Here's my argument. It's not just engineers who are facing wicked problems, it's all of our students. All of our students are going into a world where things are changing so quickly. And the expectations that they face, and the problems that they face, and the challenges that they face, they have to be capable of responding to those. For me, it raises a question. What does it take to live in a wicked world? I like putting this up here. My dad's a Lutheran minister, so it's not really what it means, but But what does it mean? What does it take to sort of work in this wicked reality where the parameters are constantly changing? The answer is kind of obvious: wicked competencies. We need to produce students who are comfortable with change, who when they encounter something they haven't seen before, don't freak out. All right? I was in Hong Kong 2009 to 2010. I was on a special Fulbright working with general education. The entire region of Hong Kong, they've got 8 universities there, the entire region was changing their university system from a 3-year British system to a 4-year American system that included some component, some variation, some adaptation of general education, liberal education. Here's why they were doing that. Hong Kong, 3 of their universities are in the top 100 internationally. The way the system used to work is that all those students study to the age of 16 in secondary school, and then 2/3 of them get shoved out in the population, and that last third, they study 2 more years. And then the top half of that third, who do the best job with their tests, they get free public university education in Hong Kong at some of the best universities in the world. The bottom half of that equation, the people whose test scores weren't quite as good, they're on their own. So they go to Canada, they go to America, they go to New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain. In 2000, they did a poll of employers in Hong Kong, and you know what they found? Yeah. Given the choice between those top-tier students who tested so well that they got into the Hong Kong universities, and the bottom half of that top-tier students who didn't test as well and went to other places, employers in Hong Kong wanted to hire the bottom tier. Because the top-tier people, you know what they were good at? They were good at taking tests. They were really good at taking tests. They could master any test you ever gave them. And the minute they encountered a test they hadn't seen, or a question they hadn't seen, or a problem they hadn't seen, they had no idea what to do. Whereas these other students who'd had to travel, who'd had to adapt, who'd had to be flexible, they could. Here's where this is about the 3rd time I've said, here's where I'm going with this. This has been a long introduction. But finally, we get around to general education. If we were to take all of the general education models in the country, and one could even say in the world, because we are finding increasingly in Asia that they are doing more and more and more of this. And we're even starting to see some universities in Europe as well. If you took them all and put them on a continuum, what you would have on the one side is what we call breadth models. These are fairly traditional models that I think probably all of us in this room are familiar with. They have a requirement of a distribution requirement. 2 social science courses, 2 arts and humanities, 2 math, 2 natural science, 2 foreign language, 2 physical education. Sometimes they play around with it. Sometimes it's 1 math and 2 science, or 2 math and 1 science. You know what? But this is basic, right? I mean, everyone's fairly familiar with this. And the rationale behind this is we want to produce well-rounded human beings. We want to expose them to the breadth of our various disciplines. On the other side, what you have is what I call an integrative model, okay? And here's what I mean by integrative. Integrative is, it's not the same as interdisciplinary. If someone says to me, I'm teaching an interdisciplinary course, what I think is, okay, you're taking two things, chemistry and art, and you're putting them together. You're tying those two disciplines together in some way. By integrative, what I'm kind of talking about is you look at a field and you think, how are the ways that this field already connects with other fields? And this is true for almost every field we have out there. You know, it used to be that the field of biology was separate from the field of chemistry, not so much anymore. And now biology is also connecting with policy because of environmental studies. I study Victorian literature. I can't teach I teach Victorian literature. I can't teach Victorian literature if I'm not paying attention to philosophy, history, art, economics, and psychology. So integrative models are models that are explicit about making connections, about seeing the connections that exist between various fields. And they do this in any number of ways. A common core, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but a common core would be where every student on campus, doesn't matter if they're nursing or creative writing or environmental science or psychology, every student on campus is going to take the same classes. And they're going to be in the class with each other, having conversations with each other, and each of them bringing to this conversation their own backgrounds and their own fields. Learning communities, where, for instance, one of the courses I teach is artistic responses to science and technology. And a learning community would be if I would link that to my friend Gil Dunn's course, that's the sociology of technology. And the same students are in my course as are in his course, which means they can carry information back and forth between the two courses. Interdisciplinary courses, integrative courses, team-taught courses, capstone courses, so a course at the end of a 2-year or a 4-year educational experience where a student is expected to take everything that they've had before and bring it together for one big project. And so they're drawing on the science courses they took, they're drawing on the mathematics courses, they're drawing on the social sciences and the humanities and arts courses, and they're working with them all, trying to solve some big problem. E-portfolio is a moment where students sit down and say, listen, here's my major, here's my field, but I'm taking this other course, and they reflect on that. How do these things connect? How don't they connect? Service learning, all these things. So another way to think about it visually is this. This is old general education, Gen Ed 1.0. You know, the idea was sciences, social sciences, arts, and humanities, and they're separate. You know, but we're going to expose you to all three of them, okay? But they're not connected. New Gen Ed says, no, they're connected. So when I teach arts and humanities, my science and technology course, I've got mathematicians in there. I've got scientists in there. And the course is specifically designed to ask them to think about how reading poetry relates to writing a computer science program. And guess what? It does. Or how Coleridge relates to string theory in physics. It does. You know, making those connections. But taking it a step further, too, not just here's how one course connects to another course, but here's how the courses you're taking in general education connect to your major courses, or connect to your community life, connect to your personal goals, your spiritual goals, connect to the jobs that you're working. The fact is, with the old model, the connections were still there. We just weren't making it explicit. With an integrative model, you're designing courses where you're foregrounding these connections, where you're making sure that students are working with these connections, that they're exploring with them, that they're trying sometimes and failing so that they can get used to moving from one area to another and facing challenges that they haven't encountered before and not freaking out when they face it. So that they're that second tier of Hong Kong students, not the top ones. I think this model is so different from the previous model, I actually like to refer to it as liberal education. And you will, There's always this conversation with students where they assume, well, I'm not going to take the liberal education courses because I'm actually conservative. Oh my, yeah. Or even worse is the liberal arts. I'm not taking liberal arts courses because I'm conservative and I don't like art. But here the liberal comes from the idea of liberation, liberating. Because if we produce a student who can walk into the room and only deal with problems that they faced before, they're not free. They are dependent upon other people. And their boss knows it, and their boss is going to get kind of annoyed with them, and they're not going to go that far. If, on the other hand, we produce a person who can encounter new problems and step back and go, okay, well, I haven't faced this before, but I had this other thing over here, and it's kind of the same, so let me try this. Okay, it didn't work the way I thought it was, so I'm going to try this. Oh, there we go. That's freedom. That's liberation. So that's what we're after. Going back to our initial model, and I will say that this data is about 5 years old. It came from the Association of American Colleges and Universities, so I know it doesn't add up to 100%. I don't know where that extra 3% went. As the English professor, I need to say that because inevitably there's a mathematician and they're going, oh God, those humanities people. But basically, if we look at the country, the profile we took, the snapshot we took of the country in 2009 told us that roughly 15% of the universities in the country were over on the purely distributive side, the breadth side. And roughly 18% were on the purely integrative side. Nothing worrying about distribution, just creating a core and having students work through it. And roughly 64% were in the middle, blending them, okay? And that the trend was clearly going this way. Reasons for that shift. Oh, I've already told you one, the changing dynamics of the workplace. We need to prepare students for the wicked problems of life beyond the college campus. A couple other reasons, though, that I'm going to talk about very briefly. The complexity of our students' lives, which is similar. The exponential growth of knowledge in our fields, the challenges we face as academics trying to provide everything to our students in a 11-course, 12-course, 14-course major, in the course of 2 years, 4 years. And this is also how the brain works. And I'll walk through each one of these in just a moment. Now I'm going to walk through each one of these. I'm going to skip the first one because we already talked about it a little bit, but let me talk a little bit about the complexity of our students' lives. I love this diagram. It comes from the Hong Kong Institute of Education, and it was kind of saying, what is a teacher? And it had this image. And what I love about it is that it's a cohesive picture, obviously. It's a tree, right? I'm guessing everybody caught that. But it's made up of all the small things that are part of a person's life. And it's a symbol for me, not just of teaching, but of really the complexity of the lives that our students face. I mean, think about the various worlds they live in. They have their major courses. They have perhaps minor courses or concentration courses. They have their gen ed courses. They have their jobs on campus. They have their jobs off campus. They have their classroom friends in the groups that they're working with here, and they have their dorm friends. And, unlike my generation, they also have their high school friends. Their high school friends are very much a part of their daily lives. When I was a kid, when I was in college, I didn't see my high school friends but twice a year, Christmas and summer break. Not so much now. They're texting with their old friends. That old world is still relevant to them. Same with their parents. When I was in college, and I'm guessing this is not dissimilar from a lot of other people, I talked to my parents once a week, right? Sunday night, 8 o'clock. Sunday night, 8 o'clock. Now, our students will be texting with them 9, 10 times a day, So all these worlds are there. And they're trying to. And then in addition, we've got media. They've got Twitter, they got Facebook, they got email, they got blogs that they read. They've just all this stuff, and they're getting buried by media constantly. The news coming in all the time. And the point I'm trying to make here is that what an integrative model does, because it talks about connections and makes explicit the fact that things are connected, it creates opportunities for students to make a meaningful whole out of all this chaos flying at them, all these different pieces. Integrative general education asks the student to say, how do these things connect? What's the whole picture here? I don't care. I don't know if it's a tree or a ship or a teddy bear, whatever it is, though, how does it mean? Where is meaning for you? Okay? Third reason, the growth of knowledge in our fields. I'll speak about English first, and then I'll give a couple of examples. And my guess is I've tested this with different people in different fields, and it seems to be true almost everywhere. In the field of English, when I was going through college, there was a canon. You read Chaucer, you read Dickens, you read Shakespeare, you read Coleridge, you read Wordsworth. It was pretty clear what you had to read. And then there was a test, if you want to go to grad school, you better know what was on that. Well, last 30 years, we have an expanding list. It's not just those old dead white guys, it's also multi-ethnic and world literature. And all these amazing voices that we can bring into play, and that students really need to be exposed to if they're going to work in a globalized society, right? But then on top of that, so we've got a breadth connection, but then we've also kind of got a vertical expansion as well. You've got critical theory suddenly coming into play. So not only are you reading more, but now we're talking about how we're reading. So it's expanded in terms of the amount of content, but also the ways we talk about that content. And the point I'm trying to make here is simply that covering that in a single major is nearly impossible. And whether you're a 4-year college or you're a 2-year college and they're going on to another place, or even in graduate school, it just simply can't be done. And so again, the way we want to think about it, and I'll give you another example from the field of psychology, and I ran this past my friend Chris the other day. Traditionally there was social psychology, clinical psychology, developmental psychology, the basic 15 fields that appeared in the textbook. Well, in the last 10 years, that textbook has added evolutionary psychology, neuroscience, sociocultural psychology, positive psychology. No one, again, saw that coming. Positive psychology, and now it's everywhere, and it's changing campuses. James Madison down in Harrisonburg, Virginia, has a whole curriculum designed on positive psychology. But in addition to just the expansion, we're also applying things in new ways. So suddenly industrial organizational, which is taking old theories and putting them in new contexts, and environmental, which is taking old theories and putting them in new contexts, and sports psychology, taking new theories and putting them in new contexts. So it's not just a one-dimensional expansion, but a multiple-dimensional expansion. And the idea is, here again, we want to, as faculty, prepare our students for everything, every contingency, every possibility that might come up. And we can't, because we've only got 12 courses. We've only got 14 courses. I've actually seen institutions that have tried. There was a university that I worked with, a private university in Hong Kong. 80% of the courses a student took were in the major. 80%, And so they were going to cover it. They were going to cover it all. That must be exhausting. And the point here is, we can't cover everything, so what can we do to prepare them for the things that we don't cover, to prepare them to encounter something that they haven't read before or that they haven't seen before, and be able to respond to it productively and constructively. Last idea, this is how the brain works. I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist, but I like cognitive neuroscience, so I read as much as I can, and I talk to people. I mean, if you are a cognitive neuroscientist, and you end up sitting next to me on a plane, you're going to hope it's a short flight, because otherwise I will be picking your brain for a long time. But basically, here's how learning occurs. I'm going to be very reductive, of course, in the brain. It's a biological process. When a person learns new information, a new neuronal network is created in the brain. Okay, it's a physical adaptation. It's a change. Here's the thing. So that neuronal network is created, but then in order to be learned, truly learned, it has to be accessed. And I think the point I kind of want to make here is this: listen, if you're working over here with the old models where sociology is separate from philosophy, which is separate from chemistry, the means of accessing anything a person learns in a course are going to be limited. The idea will be there, but there will only be a few paths going into it. Maybe even multiple paths. And it's a little bit like a train station that there's only one way to get to it. If there's only one track into a train station, not that many people are going to be going to that train station, unless it's like Steamboat, okay? what you want to do is create something where there are multiple routes into a piece of information. And by making connections, by having an integrative pedagogy, what we do by saying to students, listen, you're taking this class right now. It's in biology. You're an English major. Why is this important to you? What do you see here that you've learned that you can take back to your field or take to your life? And anytime we do that, we make those connections explicit, the means of access to that piece of information are increased. And actually, also again, the way the brain works, anytime that one of these neural networks kind of on the board of it is fired, because it's connected to this other thing, this other idea is fired as well. So it's strengthened even if you're not directly going towards it. Okay? So again, the goal, we teach our courses, we require general education courses because we think our field matters. Okay? We think if you're going to live a good life, you got to know something about philosophy, or you got to know something about art history, or you got to know something about chemistry. Well, if we want them to remember, and we want them to know this stuff, and we think they really need it, we better start connecting it in ways where they can access that information, not just for the test at the end of 14 weeks, but for the job 2 years later, or for the problem they're facing, or for the time they pick up the newspaper 5 years later, and they look at this report and they go, that doesn't seem right. I think somebody's pulling something here, you know? I just said pick up a newspaper. Like our students pick up newspapers. You know. Okay, so those are my 4 rationales for thinking about, and there are others. Paul Gaston has like 8 or something like that. At this point, briefly, just kind of questions or clarifications or thoughts. I've got a whole other kind of half of the presentation I'm going to do, but I wanted to kind of check in and see, does this make sense? Can I clarify anything?
And since we're recording, I'll bring a mic to anyone who has a question.
I told you beforehand that I would take advantage
Sure,
of
yeah.
this to sing your praises. My son is a graduating senior at Roanoke College, so as a parent, I've seen the output of this sort of thinking and revolution in general ed theory. And I was wondering if you could just talk about the series of, for example, the inquiry courses and how those were developed to respond to some of these.
Sure. I'll tell you what, I'm about to go in and kind of lay out and give a couple models for curricular models and talk a little bit about course design with integrative general education and assignment design with integrative general education. But basically for us, one of the things that happened for us is that with the old model that we had, there was a core, and it was all humanities. The humanities people had no problem having a core, and the arts and humanities. And the sciences, you know, back in 92 or whatever, the last time we did a curricular revision, they said, you know, we need our bio 101s and our chem 101s, and they serve our majors and everything. By 2003 or 4 or 5, when we started our revision, the chemists and the psychologists, they were sick of that. They said, we feel isolated on this liberal arts campus. We want to be part of this, the liberal arts education. We see ourselves as people who are connected to the liberal arts tradition. We think what we're doing really matters. And so it kind of began there. And it evolved into our curriculum, brief, quick description of it has 2 first-year seminars. The first one is a 110, it's 15 students, and it has writing in it, but it's really about ideas. The second one has kind of is an evolution on that, but it brings ethics into play and an oral communications thing. And then we've got the basic distributive model of 2 social sciences, 3 maths and sciences, 2 arts and humanities, but they're all theme-based courses. So instead of taking statistics, you would take statistics of weather, statistics of health. We've got a new one coming, statistics of the internet. Instead of taking plain old English, or humanities, I teach artistic and literary response to science and technology. I've got a colleague who teaches myths and monsters. And it's all, these themes are a means of sort of connecting things. And then we end with a problem-based capstone, where they they're tackling a real-world problem, and they're working collaboratively in groups, and this is all based upon data gathered by Hart Research Associates for the AAC&U. Employers want people who can work with other people and tackle problems and bring resources to the table, and so that's how we end it. And all of our courses are writing intensive, and secondarily, they either have to have quantitative reasoning or oral communication. So that's a brief outline of what we do. So real quick over here.
Yes, I asked my students to join me here today, and I did not tell them why they were coming or who they were coming to hear.
Do you feel like you need to apologize?
I do, actually. I feel like the question that I'd like you to answer for them is why I thought it was important enough to give up an entire class period on essay writing to come and hear what you had to say.
Uh-huh. Well, one, thank you for doing that. The answer I would give, I actually, the capstone course I'm teaching right now has to do with communicating the liberal arts. So I've got a group of students working on figuring out ways to better communicate to the rest of the student population why this matters so much. Largely, and I don't want to, I can give two reasons. The first reason is very practical. When you go into the workforce, this is a reality you're going to face. You're not going to face a reality where you're in an academic world and you're taking an English class and it's got that ENGL prefix, and you're taking a psychology class and it's PSYC, and everything is clearly separated from everything else. It all blurs together. So when you go into the workforce, you need to be nimble. You need to be able to move very quickly from one area to another. And you need to be able to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. And if you're capable of doing that, you will succeed. And if you haven't seen this data, I would encourage you to just Google AACU Hart Research. And there are 3 studies, one in 2009, one in 2013, and one in 2015, that back this up. They've surveyed employers from all different kinds of areas, successful employers, large companies, small companies, and what that data shows is that this is what employers are looking for, people who can adapt. Given the choice between, one of the questions for employers that they gave is said, listen, would you rather hire people who are just narrowly educated in one field, or just educated in breadth, or both? Well, not surprisingly, most employers said, well, both. But 60% of employers said both. Second on that list, just breadth. The number of employers, or the percentage of employers who wanted only narrow education in a single field, 15%. 15%. 85% of the employers out there are saying, give me people who can adapt. Does that help? The other reason is I think it makes life rich and interesting. I'm someone who's a creative writer, and I work with literature all the time, but when I get into neuroscience, man, it's intriguing. It's interesting. We evolve, you know? I was 22 when I got my degree. Now I'm not 22. I had long, beautiful hair. I was going to be a rock star. You know, it didn't work out that way. Our interests change. We seek new challenges, and if you're liberally educated, those challenges they come as a reward, not as a punishment. Okay? I should move on because I want to hit other things, but there will be Q&A again at the end, and I'll go straight to you first, okay? Okay. So, what does integrative liberal education look like? Let me just throw a couple models out there. I want to keep an eye on the time. I've got about 20 minutes left. At the institutional level, the book I wrote, General Education Essentials, and I know there are copies kind of floating around. If you don't have one, just ask around. I'm sure people will be happy to share. Or, you know, if my publisher were here right now, he'd be sitting in the back going, no, buy them. So go buy them. But you know, they're around. At the institutional level, I'm going to give you a couple models out here. One is the one I call the strands model. And basically, you know, it's got the distribution component going on over here. Social sciences, arts and humanities, natural sciences. Students are required to take courses in all 3 of those areas, same as with the breadth model. But what you do is you offer options, different strands, different themes in those areas that tie together. So for instance, a student can take a social science course that has a theme, nature and technology. And they can take an arts and humanities courses that has that theme, nature and technology. Or they can take natural science courses that talk about a purposeful life or an ethical life. And they can take social sciences courses that approach that. So what they get is the opportunity through the strands model to look at how different fields approach the same big questions and make connections that way. And there are a number of different ways you can do this. You know, you can just simply say, okay, you take one in each area. You're required to hit all 3 areas. Or you can say, but you know, there's options. You can take them, you know, however you want to do it. Or maybe they take 2 in each area, which is nice because, of course, what happens with that is then they really, you're guaranteed a comparison. They will see how these different fields match up and these different disciplines and these different methodologies match up with each other. Or maybe you say, no, listen, you can take a path here. You're interested in global. Okay, fine. Study all of these in the global area, you know? Or you're interested in technology? Great. We've got courses in that technology path. You do nothing but that, okay? Another model, I call this a core distribution model. I apologize, this is just an ugly diagram. But basically how it works is that students take a first-year seminar. And in that first-year seminar, they are exposed to all 3 disciplines. You know, how the humanities and arts approach things, how the social sciences approach things, how the natural sciences and mathematics approach things. And then they go on, and again, they take their distribution courses, separate courses in those areas, but there's some connection between them. Okay, so they're introduced to the methodologies all at the same time, all in the same room, all maybe approaching the same question. And then they go take separate courses, they see some connections, and then they come together again for a capstone at the end of their time, you know, their 2 years or their 4 years or wherever it is, where they bring all these pieces back together again. Okay, we talked about it in theory, now you've experienced, here's a real world problem. How do these things come into play? What would you do? I'm actually teaching our capstone course for the first time this spring semester. I have kind of a weird schedule because of some of the other responsibilities I have, so I don't get to teach as much as I want to. But one of the things that was shocking for me is in my capstone course, I've got them designing a survey, doing an internal review board application process so they can implement the survey, doing an annotated bibliography, and then designing a campaign of sort of changing people's thinking on things. I'll tell you what, when I put that survey out there, you know, the survey assignment, I expected groans and moans. They all had done it before. They'd done it in the early classes, and they went, oh, yeah, okay, we've done this. And they brought what they'd learned in these other classes back into the table in conversation with each other. Doing that IRB, I had 5 groups. I only had 1 group that had trouble getting through this 5-page application. You know, I didn't see that. I expected they would be in my office every day, and I'd have to be walking them through this. No, they'd done it before. It's a great experience. Another model. This is from St. Joseph's in Indiana. It's a small liberal arts college. And they've had the same model for 40 or 50 years now. And basically how it works is this. There are these 10 courses. They are taught interdisciplinarily. So, you know, when we look at intercultural studies, it's going to have humanists and scientists in there. Humanity in the Universe, more of a lab-based course, but it'll have social scientists and humanists and scientists in there. All 10 courses are taken by every student on campus. All 10 courses are owned by every faculty member on campus. Okay? So it's nothing but a core. There's no distribution here. And what they do to keep it fresh is every 10 years, they come in and they look. You know, sometimes the intercultural studies courses are dealing with Asia. Sometimes they're dealing with developing nations, but they just change it up regularly to make sure it's relevant for their students and fresh for them. Okay? Wagner College on Staten Island. They have a very impressive curriculum that has given them great results. They're drawing a more diverse student population. They're graduating more students. They're losing fewer students. They've actually been able to give course releases to faculty because they've retained so many more students that they don't have to teach these foundational courses over and over again. So it's a model worth looking at. They require 3 learning communities, those situations where faculty aren't teaching together, but students are kind of moving along a theme from one course to another. Students are required to take one their first year and their fourth year, and then somewhere else in between. They can do it second year, third year, or maybe even the first year. These learning communities have an experiential component, so it's not just what happens in the class. We're going to take you out of the class. We're going to take you into the city. We're going to show you how all these ideas and theories here relate to the real world out here. They also, they do have distribution requirements, but they're overlaid with these learning communities. So, you know, a particular learning community on a particular theme, environmental policies, for instance, isn't going to be nothing but sciences. It'll hit all three areas, so the students will have to make sure that they are still getting that distributive component. Worcester Polytechnic up in Massachusetts, they have two very distinct major projects. They have the initial qualifying project, and then they have the major project. And it's largely an engineering school, but they cover other majors as well. The initial qualifying project, it is created, it oftentimes deals with real world, not oftentimes, at Worcester Poly, it's always. It deals with a real world problem, oftentimes brought to them by outside sponsors, external organizations, sometimes alum, sometimes organizations that have worked with them before, but they say, here's this problem that we have. We need help with it. Students work in teams. These problems are interdisciplinary. Oftentimes, they're international. So the student may spend a semester in Bangladesh, or in Bangkok, or in Helsinki. And they count for 3 courses. So it's not just, here's a big project, and then you've got your other 3 courses that you need to take care of. It's, here's a big project, and this is all you are doing this semester. And you can see how those kinds of projects replicate how the real world actually works. When you're in the workplace, yeah, you've got to multitask, but oftentimes you're on this project right now, and this is where you need to go, and this is an initiative as a corporation, and whatever, but you're focused like that. They are also then, so that happens sophomore year usually. The major qualifying project is also working in small groups, but it is within the major, so it'll be less of an interdisciplinary team, and again, it counts for 3 courses. And that'll occur during the senior year. It's kind of a capstone. Now that you know your field, now that you've practiced in it. So that's the institutional level. At the course level, here's kind of what happens. Again, my continuum. So breadth model over here, what we have is, you know, your basic biology 101, introduction to the basic concepts of biology. Or psychology 101, introduction to the basic concepts of psychology. Or philosophy 101, which is very different because it's an introduction to the basic concepts of philosophy. You get my point here, right? Okay, it's the standard generic 101 course. If you move towards integrated, but not all the way, you could have a course that's more like this. General Education 1041, a Hong Kong marine fantasy, exploring the biology of Hong Kong Harbor and beyond. So this is an introductory biology course. It's for people who haven't taken biology before, but rather than trying to cover all the 20 chapters in the textbook, it says, here's one key problem we're facing in the world. Here's one ecosystem we want to look at. I'm going to bring in maybe 10 of those different chapters and ideas, but it's going to be focused around this theme, this problem. Okay? So that's kind of it's got coverage, but it's got more focus too. Far side, what you have is, you know, liberal ed at 261. And it's worth noting, by the way, there's nothing that says that your general education program has to be named GE. Or, yeah, so, I think you guys have a general studies thing, which is completely different. For us, it was general studies. And with the old model, it was general studies. And, you know, nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, God, general studies, I can't wait, you know. And it wasn't really descriptive. Now, I know you guys have general studies, but it's very different than what we have. It's a national major. But the point, right now what it's called is intellectual inquiry, INQ. And it's what we're able to do. I mean, I work with language. It's rhetoric. We were able to say, oh, this isn't general studies. This is about inquiry, asking questions, asking questions, asking questions. You foreground what it is you value and what you believe in and what you want them to pay attention to. So in this model, science, technology, and the future, an exploration of scientific thought and innovation taught from a variety of disciplinary perspectives. You know, this Bio 101 over here is taught just by biology professors, oftentimes adjuncts who aren't getting paid very much. This one here, you know, more biology professor, but this one here, you got a biology professor teaching some sections, you got a fine arts professor teaching other sections. They collaborate, they've talked with each other, and sometimes they're in the room. There's all sorts of models you can do together, but it's being taught from a variety of different perspectives, and it's bringing science and all these different things into play. Now, you may have noticed a couple things about this. One, the more integrative models, the ones over here, they're less worried about content coverage. They're not sitting there. I mean, one of my best friends, Chris Buchholz, is in psychology. He goes, you know, well, I've already mentioned this. 15 years ago, the psychology textbook was 16 chapters long. 8 years ago, it was 20. Now it's 24. How am I supposed to? But my semester is 13 weeks still. I can't cover all of that stuff. The more integrative models are less worried about coverage, and they're more interested in saying, okay, here's a couple ideas. Let's think about how they connect to the world around us. With the philosophy that if we can teach a person to deal with problems they haven't encountered before, then when those other things come into play, they'll know, okay, listen, I don't know about this. I wonder what I can find out. Oh, I know how to evaluate good sources. Oh, here's something from environmental psychology that I can apply to this, okay? Also, this has a consequence on the texts that are chosen for a course, very obviously. If you're not teaching a coverage-based 101 course, you don't require students to buy a $150 textbook that has 15 chapters they're not going to use. And so oftentimes what you'll do is find smaller texts, even sometimes online sources, and that's a good thing because textbooks, here's one thing I know. I work in English. I work with writing. We know that the more a person reads, the better a writer they are. The data in, data out. Okay, it's that simple. Textbooks are not eloquent, they're not engaging, and they don't produce people who create eloquent, engaging writing. And we want our students to do eloquent, engaging writing. Now, if we can find some shorter texts that focus on a particular theme, particular topic, oftentimes they were written by people who really care about this. Oftentimes they go through a more stringent publishing acceptance process. And students reading them will be more focused, they'll enjoy it more, and they'll actually read more, they'll carry more over. So that's just my little spiel. And I don't hate textbook companies, but I just want to kind of put that out there. I will also point this out that where you locate your course design and your institutional curricular design on that continuum will have a major impact on two things. The first is the degree of integration that students will be asked to perform on their own. If you're working with a traditional breadth model where all the courses are separated, students have to make those connections themselves. If you're working with a more integrative model over here, faculty are providing a platform for students to learn to make those connections. This synthesis, this integrativeness, it's not easy. So we need to work with students on it, and that's another argument for moving this way. The other point is, the more you move from this side over here to this side over here, the more interdisciplinary conversations you're going to have as faculty. Over here, everybody stays in their little camp. Over here, people are kind of working together, and in the middle, they're kind of working together too. Now, maybe I'm in the minority, but I really think that when we have those interdisciplinary conversations, that's when our careers become engaging and exciting and refreshing, and we're not doing the same old thing because suddenly we're talking to psychologists and they're saying, well, have you thought about this in terms of neurodevelopment? No, I hadn't thought about that before, so I would try this and this and this. And it's more interesting. I mean, we're academics. We got in here because we like asking questions and we like learning things. And then we sometimes, if we find ourselves in a position where we're not learning anything anymore, that's not good, right? So I'm an advocate for this. Okay. At the assignment level, I'm going to go through this very quickly. I actually do a lot of workshops on assignment design, but didn't work it in here because of time constraints. But just suffice to say that there is going to be a shift. The further you move to this side, the integrative side, it changes the kinds of assignments we give. Because you're no longer focusing on just your major or even just the academy. You're thinking about the big picture. So you will see a shift from papers written for professors. Now, it doesn't mean that this won't occur, but it will occur largely in the major. Okay? If I'm teaching an English course and I've got science majors in my class, they're only going to take my English course. Why do I want to teach them to write to an English professor just like English students? That's not what they're there for. They're there for making connections. So there's going to be a shift away from writing specifically, strictly for professors in gen ed. Majors, different story. A shift away from the generic research paper. Now that you've been in this course for 12 weeks, I want you to pick a topic that interests you, go to the library, do some research, find something, and then add your voice to the conversation. Because you're a biology major in my English class, clearly you have an expertise. No, you don't. So it'll be a move away from that, okay? It's just simply that we can't ask someone to have that kind of conversation and pretend to be a scholar in the field when that's not the whole point of the course. Oral presentations to the choir, okay? I'm going to talk about gender. You all have studied gender. Let me tell you things you already know. Ooh, aren't you engaged? Aren't I engaged? I mean, it's a practice in redundancy to some level. Exams focusing on memorization of content. I have no problem with memorization. I want my students to know when the first Education Act in England, in Victorian England, happened and when the second Education Act and what they did. They need to know that, because it has to do with literacy rates and gender and all these very important things. But that is important only for my major. Similarly, memorizing the periodic table is really important in chemistry, but if you're not in chemistry, you know, you get it on your little, in fact, most of the chemists I know just get it on their little device anyhow. So memorization isn't out the window, but in these courses, memorization isn't the end goal. Show me that you memorized all this stuff that we covered in the course in the last 13, 14 weeks. No, that's not the purpose. What we're going to shift to are things like this. Papers written for real and diverse audiences. Okay? Related to that, a variety of genres, more indicative of real-world writing. The thing, my issue with the generic research paper, again, perfectly fine for field, for major, but only law clerks are going to have to do that kind of research and that kind of writing when they get into the real world. The rest of us, the rest of our students, are going to face. Some days they're going to have to write to the boss. Some days they're going to have to write to the boss's boss. Some days they're going to have to write to the client. Some days they're going to have to write to the school board. And some days they're going to have to write to the government regulator. And they need to be, again, that word nimble. They need to be able to move quickly from one field to another and to know how to adapt and think about their audience. And this helps with that. Oral presentations to audiences that really matter. I'm going to give you an example in just a moment of this. But rather than sort of thinking about the audience out here as I'm just giving an oral presentation to give an oral presentation because my teacher's making me give the oral presentation and they're making me do the oral presentation because they're required to make me do the oral presentation. So, okay. To audiences that really matter, I'll give you that. Exams focusing on explanations of significance. And we're already seeing a lot of this in mathematics. You know, okay, yeah, I know you can do the problem. Can you talk to me about why you did the problem the way you did? Because that allows you to transfer that information from one setting to another setting. Let me give you a couple examples of these things. From a course in marine biology, this is a prompt, the one I had up there earlier. You, the student, are on an environmental policy board looking at the issue of reclamation in Victoria Harbor. In other words, they're filling in the harbor. Your job is to make a recommendation with regards to the impact on marine life. You are the only biologist on that board. The other ones are city planners, they might be business owners, they might be government people. You're the only biologist. So you have to tell this audience who isn't familiar with biology how this works and what they need to think about and why it matters. And I will, what potential hazards do you see, how might you explain these hazards in a carefully researched way. This doesn't exclude research. It just changes the purpose of the research. It gives it purpose. You're not researching just because I told you to. You're researching because you have to in order to explain to this audience. Another example, you've noticed on recent visits home that your parents seem to be gaining a little bit of weight. Okay? Design a diet and exercise regimen appropriate for their age, preparing your plan and explaining to them, be sure to research these criteria A, B, and C that I think are really important as the instructor. I laugh at this example because I came up with it. I encountered it in a workshop in Hong Kong, and I used it as an example, and half the faculty put their hands up and said, yeah, in Hong Kong, a kid's never going home and telling their parents that. It just doesn't work like that. So that was a learning moment for me. Gender studies. This is the oral presentation thing that I was talking about. Prepare a speech to a group of 6th grade boys discussing gender roles and violence. If I'm in a room talking to a bunch of people who have studied gender, about gender, there's no real purpose to that because I'm telling them things that they already know, or related to things that they already know. This talk, going to 12-year-old boys and saying, here's what you need to know. And I'm not saying that the student necessarily has to go to the 12-year-olds. If they can, great. The more real you can make it, the better. But what you were finally grading on, I'm standing up there, I'm still in front of my classmates, but in my head, they better be 12-year-olds. And my speech better be pitched to them, and I better be thinking about the needs of that audience. Again, responding to the variety of audiences that we have. Art example, design and propose a project and a budget for a local public mural for grant funding applications. Include description of the project, rationale, means of creating community input. Basically, this is a public mural course. And it's taking art, which is very important, and talking about all the same things that art historians and social art theorists talk about, but it's talking about it in context and then saying, now do something with this. Come up, find a place in the city where you think they need a mural. Think about what kind of mural you think they could do there. Propose a budget. Think about who you'd have to talk to. Think about how you would appeal it to them. It's taking the very meaningful content of the course and asking them to think about how that meaningful content connects to life outside the class. And final one, any class, final exam question. I really like this one. What did you learn in this class that matters? Because if you can't answer this, we got troubles. But it's not a random question where you can just BS me. Explain your reasoning, citing at least 3 texts or theories or equations or whatever you work with in your field. Be sure to have a clear thesis and relate your answer to life outside of the classroom. Okay? This question has changed my teaching more than anything I've ever done. Because when I asked this question the first time, I did not get what I was hoping to get. All right. So a few final thoughts. There's probably too many of these. I'll go through them quickly, though. You want to spread as much as possible general education throughout the curriculum so that it will have more students engaged with it. There will be greater learning, but also so that more faculty will be participating in it. I'm sorry, that was my first point. Second point, GE courses should not necessarily be basic. There's nothing that says that they have to be generic and dummied down, okay? The brain responds to being challenged. When we're encountering things that we've seen before, we tend to tune out. So give students a challenge. Doesn't mean you don't help them along, because of course you do, but the better the challenge, the more engaged people are going to be. GE courses provide an opportunity for strong pedagogy. Because we're moving away from content, you start thinking, and you're thinking about application and meaning, it gives an opportunity for all sorts of important conversations that can really change our teaching in fun ways. This is my first point. The more widespread the responsibility for gen ed is going to be, the better the program's going to be. If it's just a little corner of campus that's dealing with it over here, institutional commitment to it, institutional understanding of it, all of those things are going to be diminished. Avoid an algorithmic approach to general education. Be flexible. Be flexible. Be flexible. Recognize disciplinary differences. Recognize, gosh, you guys have 3 different campuses. Are there ways that you can create space in there? And then last two, encourage thoughtful discussion and experimentation. Allow people to take risks. Because we are at our best when we're kind of on the edge and really trying new things. And oftentimes our classes will be better. And then last one, tinker. If something doesn't work the first time, Don't just go, well, that didn't work and now I'm done, because that's exactly what we don't want our students to do. Pick it up, look at it, examine it carefully, try again. Okay, if it doesn't work 5 times, then I think you can move on. But, okay, so that's my talk. Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. There's my email address. Feel free to send me a question. There's my Twitter account. So, time for questions? Do we have time? Okay, good.
So if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll let the mic over.
Oh, and you had one too in the blue, so, yeah.
Oh, it's being recorded, okay. From an institutional perspective, thinking about number 6, where you talked about enhancing discussion and experimentation, how did you foster that culture? Because it's easy to just integrate without integrating with depth. So you can have a course that's superficially integrated, but if we really want students to develop those inquiry skills and really understand the integration in depth, then the course has to be created that way. And that's taking people out of a comfort zone.
When you say people, do you mean faculty or students?
Well, to create the course, it involves faculty, it involves staff, it involves administration.
Okay.
So I'm thinking from an institutional perspective, if you could comment on how you foster that culture.
Yeah, well, one, we're still working on it. Just be frank. I had a recent conversation with the dean. We were talking about pedagogical innovation. I sort of brought up risk and tenure. And he got out the tenure handbook, and you know what we found out? We found out that when you come up for promotion and tenure to full professor, it says specifically you had better be in tune with the conversations in your field about pedagogies, and you better show that that's happening in your classrooms. You know what it said for promotion for tenure? It said, tell us what you're doing and tell us why you're doing it. So we explicitly said, do not take any risks until you're coming later on. That's bad. So you write it into your, whatever your faculty handbook guidelines are, as much as you possibly can, to write it into the culture. I had another idea that I was kind of thinking about too. Faculty innovation grants and awards. Learning communities are oftentimes a great way because it asks people to work more closely with people from other fields, and that leads to pedagogical exchanges. Yeah, but the main thing is, whatever your guidelines for, promotion or for pay salary increases or however, or revalidation of your contract, it had better have something in there about, we want to see you being a thinking teacher. We want to see you thinking. We want you to see you being smart. We want to see you being engaged with pedagogical ideas, not just enough to communicate the ideas. Think about how the brain learns and engage those. So I should, because we missed her earlier. So I just want to. Well, you can say it and I'll repeat it so they can. Oh, I have to do it.
First of all, I want to thank you so much because everything that you said today just really hit home.
Oh, good.
And when you were talking, in the first part, you talked about it's okay to fail. And I think that's something that we really need to help our little soccer and trophy kids right now because they all got trophies. And I think it's fine to fail. And when you were saying that, I thought about Google.
Yeah.
Because that's what Google does. When you work for Google, they give you all this money to make all these games and make all of these wonderful things. And when you fail, they go, that's okay, because you learned from it. And I think that what you said today is going so much further than, and I just really appreciate you telling us all of that and having such good.
Good. I mean, one of the things that happens too with a content-based model is what will happen is there'll be a lecture for 14 weeks, and in the 15th week, students suddenly have to produce a paper or take a test, and there's no room for failure there. So what we need to do is if whatever big project we're going to have here at the end, we need to give it to them in small levels early and slightly larger levels and slightly larger levels. And this one over here counts for nothing. This one over here counts for just a little. This one starts to count quite a bit so that they can fail. Because this is what we know. I mean, this is what I tell my kids. Is when you lose, that's when you figure things out. but we don't write that into our curriculum. So.
I have a more practical question.
What?
A practical
Okay.
question. I direct the Global Humanities Institute here. We just created a new course, Intro to Global Humanities,
Okay,
and it's thoroughly interdisciplinary.
great.
We will have guest lecturers.
Excellent.
We have various people lining up to teach them from different disciplines.
Very cool.
This is a very difficult time, though, to be doing something like that because people feel unsafe about protecting. I mean, they feel they need to protect their disciplines, so courses won't be cut, so that they won't be compromised as a discipline. And these are very real fears, and I respect them. But when you try to do something like this, to put a course like this forward, you have all kinds of competing worries about what this means in the long term. So I wonder if you could just, what would you say to those people?
That is a hard
Yeah,
one,
that
and
is a
that's
hard
one.
one.
That's one where I wish I've never been a dean, thank God, or a provost or a president. So I don't have the bird's eye view in that way. But I will say that one of the things that I have found. Let me put it another way. One of the things that we did struggle with early on in our conversations on campus about general education is getting people out of the defense of the major. My main job is to protect my major and make sure my major seems strong. One of the things we had going for us, and this sounds a little weird, but one of the things that helped us with that is small liberal arts colleges on the model we're on, high tuition, high discount, are struggling. And so you better stop thinking about your major. But the other way to really respond to it is just to foreground, listen, there's your major, and then there are your students. And your students don't care about the political ramifications for your major. What they care about is going to the world and being prepared for that world. And so just again and again, putting in front of the faculty. Part of the challenge is for faculty, general education is counterintuitive, right? It doesn't match our careers. Our careers were all about focus. The more focused we were, the more we got rewarded. And that's not the reality for our students. And so we have to just foreground that. It's about the students and about the realities they're going to face. So, thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your passion.
Oh.
And I just was thinking, STEM created STEAM, right? And the arts were left out, of course, of that original idea about STEM. And then I thought back on the 80s when you had A Nation at Risk.
Yeah.
And all the money. And before that, there was something, every 20 years or so, something happens. Usually it's a bad economy. And then after the bad economy, people rush right to the sciences and math.
Right.
And I understand that. It's intuitive. It makes sense. You
Yeah.
can quantify it. So what you're suggesting is counter to that in some way. And do you think that it's something that you are born with? In other words, you're an embodiment of someone who's interested in all kinds of things by what you've done in your life. Could a person like you be created? I guess I don't mean genetic engineering. And
with hair,
let alone well, hey, there's some rock stars. Let's face it, that don't have any hair anymore. But could someone like you be created? Did you have examples? And then how do you get a whole? That's the thing that gets me. A whole institution, when there's this pressure on now for measurement and quantification, to all of a sudden, wait a minute, take it easy. Open your mind. Expand it. Let's work together. I mean, it's kind of, and as much as I personally agree, and I've tried things like this, and I'm going to keep trying.
Sure.
But it's the general momentum. Is not going in that direction. At least I'm not seeing it.
The social pressures.
At least I'm not seeing it.
The political pressures.
And I've seen this happen.
Yeah.
It just keeps cycling. We get back to this, and it seems to be troubled by an economy. And I'm wondering, it's your institution. Was it ripe for this? Were people asking for this? Do you find yourself going against the tide, or?
We find ourselves, every institution has its own challenges. And I talked a little bit about, sort of societal pressures, which have increased. Also, though, sometimes, attrition was an issue, and we were trying to find ways to deal with that. I know that's what drove Wagner College. I mean, they were losing 30, 40%. I've worked with campuses that had first year to second year attrition in the 50 to 60% range. Attrition, not retention. And boy, I'll tell you what, they went through their curricular revision pretty damn quick. I mean, they just got on board. So there's some of those questions. I mean, the first question you asked, and I'm trying to kind of hold them all in my head, the first question you asked about, can a person like me be created? I think yes, but you need to put them in the context where education becomes less about taking the test and getting the grade, and more about exploring things. I mean, part of the answer I would give, can a person like me be created? I would say yes, and what creates it is when you get about 40, 45, 50, and you start to think, really, this is it? Aren't there other, you know what I mean? I mean, we get curious because, yeah, is that all there is? And it used to be, responded to by buying a Ferrari, but none of us can get paid for that anymore. So, so now we start to explore other fields. But just but I think the other way to create it, though, is to put a computer scientist and a poet together in a room for conversation, and a biologist, because the sciences are about creativity. They are. They have to be. And they're about trying and failing, and then trying again, which, dang, it sounds a heck of a lot like my creative writing workshops, But if we don't have these people in the room, then the mythologies keep coming over and over again. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've had one of my creative writing advisors walk into my office and say, well, I just can't do math. I'm just failing my math class because I just can't do that. That's not true, Yeah, so it's getting people into the conversation, and that's all I can think about. But it is a challenge. Yeah. So. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay. Oh, hi.
Go ahead.
The last general education reform process, where exactly this equivalent courses that are accepted from at other institutions. And how does this work with transfer in terms of general education? If we develop all of these courses that are integrative, are we to expect that all the institutions in Maryland are going to be developing this similar kinds of courses, and therefore there'll be no transfer issues? Thank you.
The argument I would make, because we have a theme-based general education curriculum, so every course is topics-based, but they all fit within a disciplinary boundaries. And we've done a couple things to sort of address this problem. One is we'll have clear sort of core, a minimum number of clear core learning outcomes for a course. So for instance, the psychology courses, the Inc. 260s, they have to be sure to cover A, B, and C, or to deal with questions A, B, and C, or to deal with skills A, B, and C. So that class has a generic quality at the base that can then transfer to a different school. But we've also found that what we have to do is we list the courses on campus as Inc. 260 evolutionary psychology, but on the transcript it appears as Inc. 260 somehow introductory psychology appears in there. And what we found is that our gen ed dean will tell you that she's never had transfer not occur. That she has had cases where the kid tries to transfer, and we've got a different circumstance. I mean, for us, we do not want them to transfer, whereas you guys are sort of, but whereas you guys are setting them up to move on to different places, and some great places. But there will be occasions where a student comes in and goes, they're not accepting this. And at that point, she gets on the phone or sends an email and says, and she's got templates for all of these. And says, basically, here's what this course covers. It covers this, and this. It does it in this, and this, and it does it in this way. And she has never had a case where that hasn't then been accepted. So it's a matter of design a little bit. It's a matter of rhetoric a little bit. It's a matter of having the kind of structures to sort of follow up on that to do it. But the other point I'm going to kind of finally make is, finally what matters is the education of the student. You know, so if there's transfer issues, those are secondary issues that need to be dealt with eventually. But you need to design the best class you can for the student with the best and most important learning experiences so that it will last. You know, I mean, I can give you a class that'll transfer real easily, and the student won't remember a single thing from it because they took the test and then they were done with it. We don't want that. We want them to be able to recall this information. We want this information to be meaningful for them. Does that help? Somewhat, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take Miller, and we'll make Miller the last question here, so
Okay.
in the interest of our time.
Mine's kind of a long one. You mentioned that based on time constraints, you left out the one thing that really is fascinating for me, and that is the assignment design.
Sure.
So is there a way that you can provide that for those of us who are like boots on the ground kind of teachers?
It's really kind of like a 90-minute workshop. And, you know, I mean, the one way I could do it is I could come back, but it's kind of, you know, let me invite myself back here. So, yeah, it's not, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'd be more than happy to work. It's not the sort of thing that is easily transportable. But I tell you what, actually though, yeah, it's all about, it's not about money, but that Gen Ed book that I mentioned, Gen Ed Essentials, I think the whole second to last chapter kind of lays out the ways of thinking about this. And it really has to do with, one, being open to a variety of genres, but two, recognizing that academic audience is oftentimes the impediment for good writing and oral communication from our students. So if we can change that factor, you're going to get better writing and deeper learning as a result of the writing. But yeah, it's in the book, I guess, is the short answer I should have given. So. Buy the book. That's my mom. Good thing my mom's not here because she would be so embarrassed. So. Sure.
We want to thank Dr. Hanstedt for coming. We do have the book.
Oh, okay.
It is on reserve at, yes, it is on reserve at all 3 campuses. I have several copies in my own office.
There you go.
Germantown folks, if you want
Yeah.
one, we have lots of copies of the book. We have used it as the cornerstone of the redesign that we're working on. But can we get a hand for Dr. Hanstedt for coming to us today? Thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge on this topic. It's inspiring for us and exciting for us as we move forward, as we redesign our program. I want to thank all of you for coming today, and particularly for those of you who invited your students to come as well. It's important for our students to hear about general education and how it's of value to them. So thank you for your time. On a more practical note, if you were looking for professional development credit for attending, please make sure you have signed one of the sign-up sheets outside of the room. If you're a student and you need proof for your professor that you came today, there's a sign-up sheet for professors on the table right outside of the room as well. So thank you for coming. We hope you all enjoy the rest.